This was probably about 15 years ago. I went to college 4 hours away from my hometown and would occasionally drive home for weekend visits to see my family, high school buddies and such. My parents are divorced, though still lived in the same county, and at the time my dad was living in a rather small apartment, so I would stay at my mom's ranch house out in the countryside. One such weekend, I'd been out at a late-night techno bowling thing with my friends and was driving solo back to my mom's during the wee hours. Being that my mom lives out in the boons, it wasn't uncommon to not see many or any other cars on the road during the drive. So I'm driving along these country roads, minding my business, then I notice I'm being followed by another car. At first I don't think much of it, however, I notice the other car starts swerving behind me. It's up pretty close on my bumper, definitely too close for comfort, and just constantly swerving and weaving back and forth. This goes on for a couple of miles on these deserted, dark country roads. No one else is around. At this point I'm pretty freaked out. The car isn't making any move to pass me, despite having ample opportunity to do so, and there's no way I'm stopping, pulling over or going home, in case it's a crazy axe murderer or something. So I start basically driving in circles, making as many turns as I can, trying to lose this guy. No luck, he is glued to my bumper and still constantly swerving. So I decide to start heading back into the city where I'd been hanging out with my friends. It's very early in the morning, but the city is serviced by a state highway, which today is a 3-lane interstate, so I figured getting up onto a higher speed, well-lit road with maybe some other cars around would be helpful. The car still follows me, matching my speed. He follows me for several miles until I, in a fit of panic, and severely not thinking about potential other options, like going to the police department, pull a move of questionable safety and legality, and swerve all the way over from the fast lane to an exit ramp at the last minute, surprising the car behind me enough that he missed the exit and presumably had to go up to the next exit a few miles down the road. Having shaken my swerving companion, I booked it back through town on the regular roads, driving probably 30 to 40 over the speed limit in a total panic and rush to get back to my mom's house. I make it back to her house without further incident, though my flesh is crawling at this point, and every pair of headlights I see behind me is making me paranoid as hell. To this day, I can't drive at night back to my mom's house in the countryside without thinking about it. Even typing this story out now is making my skin crawl. No idea what the swerving car's deal was. Never saw it again, that I know of. This isn't really my story, but my father's. He was a small-town cop in the early 1960s. He always volunteered to work night shift. Often he was the only cop on duty for the whole town. As a result, whenever they'd hire a rookie cop, they'd put them with my dad for a while. It was usually quiet the latter half of the shift, and there was more time for training. It was one of those nights where they were on patrol. They then spotted some guy staggering along in the dark. Thinking he was drunk, they pulled up to check on the guy. When they called to him, he didn't respond. My dad lit him up with the spotlight and his blood ran cold. The guy was covered in blood. His hands, face, arms, legs and so on. All from what looked to be bite marks. It looked like something with 2 fangs like a snake had bitten this guy dozens of times. Now, Dad was completely comfortable in the dark. He used to hunt in the dark as a teen. When he was growing up back then, there weren't any rules against it, and they were poor. It was often the only way he or his siblings were going to have food the next day. At that moment, he was more than a little afraid of what he couldn't see. He didn't know of anything that could do that to someone, even if they were half drunk, and he didn't want to blunder into it. They asked the guy what happened, but he was too far gone from booze and blood loss to answer their questions. Dad radioed the dispatcher and had them call for an ambulance. They wrapped the guy in a couple of blankets, shoved him in the back of the cruiser, and went to meet the ambulance. Back then it came from about 20 miles away on a 2-lane blacktop, so it wasn't uncommon to meet them halfway. The ambulance guys were at a loss to explain the bite marks as well. After they were relieved of their passenger, Dad and his trainee went back to the station and grabbed an extra shotgun. They returned to where they found the guy, and started following the blood trail. The trail found its way a few streets over to the front door of a small house. Dad recognized it as one he'd been to several times for domestic disturbance calls. They knocked, and this lady opens the door. She takes one look at the two cops standing there, and just holds her wrists out as if inviting them to cuff her. It seems that the guy who'd been what they thought bitten was a mean drunk. He would occasionally come home drunk and abuse her. This particular night she'd been in the kitchen when he came in. He started in on her, and she snapped. She got her hands on a two-pronged meat fork and went berserk. She stabbed him in the top of the head, face, his arms, hands, legs, and anything else she could reach, as he fled. The guy nearly died from blood loss, but he survived. He had to have been hating life for a while as he healed up. Neither one of the couple wanted to press the issue, so nobody was charged. Dad said he didn't know if they stayed together or not, but he never had to run another call at that address while he was still on the force. I was 17 and new to driving. It was dark out, and I was going to pick up a friend. However, I had never been to their house before. I brought a second friend for some company on the drive. The first friend's house is in a very rural area. The GPS had us take a road that was more like a path through a field than anything, but it connected with the road we needed to be on. Towards the end of the road, there was a house with lots of people outside and a car parked on the road, essentially blocking it. We stopped way back from the group of people, and an older man, clearly drunk, came up to the window and asked what we were doing there on that road. We explained we were just following the GPS and were trying to get somewhere. He said the car should be moved in a minute, and there was a stop sign up ahead on the other side of the barn where we could turn onto the road we needed. In the midst of all this, my friend notices two guys picking up a girl and shoving her into the back seat of this car while she's kicking and screaming. My friend, being bold, wanted to know what was going on with that, and tried to get out. I told her do not get out of the truck. Then the car pulled off to the side and we slowly continued down the road to the stop sign. We sat there for a minute to see if we were to go right or left, and then boom, I get rear-ended by an SUV. I slid the cab window open and yelled, "What the hell?" A girl pokes her head out and goes, "That's what you get for showing up to my boyfriend's house unannounced." Then a man came up to my driver's window screaming, and I just gunned it, and we drove off. No service from then on. It was night time. We stopped at a newer-looking house with their lights on. It was an older couple, and we explained what happened. They knew where my friend lived and drove there while we followed. I called the police once we got to my friend's and had service. They came and took my info, then called a few days later to say they went to the road we were on, and the house we were near, but no one was there. I'm assuming a bunch of drunk idiots, but it was one of the scarier situations that's happened to me. I live in the middle of nowhere, and I used to pick up hitchhikers constantly. On Christmas night I drove over the mountain back to my girlfriend's house after we spent the day with my family. She lived even further in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking an hour away from the nearest grocery store. I'm taking the only road off this area out of there. It's about 20 miles of nothing, other than woods a couple of miles deep on each side of this road. It's just a very rural area we all lived in. I'm 18 years old speeding along this long straight road about 80 miles per hour. Very dumb, but I was a reckless kid, just trying to get home before 2 a.m. I suddenly fly past this guy in the dark, just walking down the road miles away from everything. It was freezing out, and I wanted to end Christmas doing something good and not let someone freeze to death on our mountain. I throw on the brakes and back up. I asked the guy if he needed a ride. He was carrying a compound crossbow. I was thinking a crossbow at 1:30 a.m., dude's a freaking poacher, but I can't back out now. I tell him to put it in the back of the truck and get in. He sets his crossbow in the back and tells me he's parked up ahead a couple miles away. The guy gets in and goes dead quiet. I mean, he doesn't speak a word. As I said, I picked up strangers a lot back then, but never had one of them just sit in silence. I ask him if he hung out with his family for Christmas today, and he just mumbles no, and immediately goes back into silence. At that point, I just wanted this guy out of my truck. I continue driving in silence for a couple of minutes until he tells me to pull over at the turnoff up ahead. I pull off to the side instead of pulling completely in, just to be safe since it was a dead end. He just kinda sits there silently for a couple of long, uncomfortable seconds and then gets out. It really felt like he was thinking hard about what to do next. He finally gets out, leaving the door open. I say something along the lines of "Don't forget your crossbow," then I reach across to shut the door as he turns around to grab it. He slowly grabs his crossbow out of the back and then turns back and just stares at me through the window without moving. I just kinda sat there looking at him and decided to drive off. Not very eventful, but you had to be there. Something was up with this guy. He was giving off extremely creepy vibes. At the pull-off I dropped him at, there was just a minivan parked with the door open. That struck me as odd too. I haven't picked up a hitchhiker since, and neither am I planning to. Maybe 6 months after I passed my practical test and shortly after my 18th birthday, I was at a party at a friend's house. I wasn't drinking and offered to take a few people home when I left. At this point I should state we all stay in different villages, so I drove from mine to the second one to get to the party, and then on to a third to take people home. This is important to remember. So as the party draws to a close and we leave, it's maybe 1 a.m. so it's as dark as it'll get. Like I said, I was driving between villages along dark twisty roads, but I was at a steady speed. Just as we are about to get into the village we're heading to, I see what looks like a body in the middle of the road. Naturally, as a young and inexperienced driver, I got scared as hell and swerved to avoid this thing on the road. This was on a bend, so if anything was coming it would almost certainly been a bad crash. Thankfully there wasn't, and I came to a halt at the entrance to the village. My friend and I look at each other in silence before I eventually say, "Dude, we need to see if that guy is okay. If someone is going any faster he's gonna get killed." Reluctantly, my friend agrees, so we park up in the entrance to a farm and slowly walk back into the darkness, waiting to find someone who's had a bit too much to drink, or worse, a dead body. As I said, it was pitch black, so we used the torches on our phones to provide some light. As we emerged from the bend we saw the guy. To our horror, we see a figure standing in all white pointing at us. It doesn't move or say anything, it just points at us. We look at each other again in horror and look back at this figure, but now it's gone. We run back to my car, unsure if this was maybe one of those gang things you see mentioned on Facebook and other social media. We floored it out of there, and I took a 15-minute detour to avoid that road when I drove home. We never saw that figure again, nor did we hear about it in the news. I still hesitate driving up to that village now in case such thing happens again. We are both certain it was a person lying there, and we both swore it got up. We both couldn't have imagined the same thing. He was drunk and I was stone cold sober. Surely we didn't imagine it.